Hi everyone and welcome to tonight's webinar. Tonight we are fortunate enough to have Megan Brown from Cattle Plan. Megan is the Regional Manager for Cattle Plan. I will hand over to Megan now to start her presentation. So welcome Megan.
Thanks, Mikhail. So it's really good to join you all here this evening. My name is Megan Brown. As Michaela said, I'm the Regional Manager with Minitube. Minitube, for those who don't know, is an animal reproduction company, and we're based in Germany, but we have offices all around the world, and in about 114 different countries we actually operate. Here in Australia, my role is just working with cattle, so beef and dairy cattle reproduction, but we cover all different species, so horses, sheep, pigs, chickens, all kinds of things. Tonight, though, Michaela's just asked me to give you a bit of an overview of beef reproduction as a whole, and because we've probably got a very experienced range of people that are joining us, there's a little chat box when you put your mouse over the screen. You'll see a little chat box come up, or Q&A box. So if you've got any questions at all during the talk, then I'm happy to do a bit of a Q&A at the end if we've got time. And I've also got my details at the finish if there's any other questions that you may have. I'm happy if you send me an email or anything like that. So I just wanted to cover a couple of topics, firstly around reproduction and why it's something that we always talk about in beef cattle production. Why having healthy breeders and bulls is really important for our businesses. The different types of reproductive management systems that we can implement, and how to make different decisions for your breeding season. So firstly, why do we talk so much about reproduction in beef herds? So the main reason we do is because it drives the success of all of our different cattle farming operations. So whether you're a stud producer or a commercial producer, you do have to rely to a certain degree on reproduction for that business. So it drives all of the other parts of the business. The different reproduction decisions that we make can have long-term effects on our cattle business. And for example, if you buy a bull this year, his genetics will be in your herd for a very long time. So it's something we need to think about before we make those decisions. All of the other management decisions on the farm actually impact reproduction as well. So if you're changing nutrition, if you're looking at different types of pasture management, putting in watering points, all of those things can impact reproduction. So we look at it from that angle as well. And there's a lot of new technologies that are always being developed in this field because it's impacted by so many other parts of the business. And as a whole, we're a growing population around the world, so we're going to need to keep producing more beef and more food for that population. So we need to do that in continually improving ways. And because we've got a lot of research time and technology invested in this industry, we also have some very good tools now available to us to make these breeding decisions. So I'll go through some of that with you tonight. So when we're looking at breeding goals in beef herds, every farm will have a different business goal. So some farms may be breeding animals, they want to breed a nice tight line to put into a feedlot. Other properties may be breeding animals for export. There's lots of different reasons why you may be doing or going into breeding. So everyone's goal may be different, but at the end of the day, having healthy bulls and healthy breeders helps you reach your full potential to meet those goals. So the aim for every farm is to have one calf from every cow every year, and that makes sure that you have the best production you can possibly get. However, the window for this to actually happen is pretty small. So from the time a cow has a calf to when she actually has to be back in calf again is only about 83 days. So we need to make sure that her health is really good, that her nutrition is really good, because these will impact her pregnancy rates. So essentially, cows that are in better health with good welfare get pregnant faster. And this goes for the bulls as well. So your bulls that are in good condition, in the right breeding age, they work better for you when they're in that better condition. So what we're aiming for is to have those pregnancies early in the season, which means that those cows then have longer to recover between the next time they have to be in calf. Those calves are born into generally a better season when they're born at the start of the season. So they've got more milk from mum, they can grow in at a better rate. And also at weaning, they're going to be heavier because they're earlier, older calves. And when you have a lot of them born at the same time, you also get a nice uniform line of weaners. So for someone who wants to sell their cattle to a certain market, that can be very important. So how do we do this when we're thinking about our bulls? So firstly, to make sure our bulls are in good working order, we need to look at what vaccinations they need. This will vary depending on where you're located across Australia. Different regions will require different vaccines. So it's something you need to have a chat to your vet about, or possibly even your ag department. They may be able to point you in the right direction of what you need. But the main ones for bulls to consider are vibriosis, pestivirus, 7-in-1, which covers your clostridial infections, botulism, particularly in areas that are phosphorus deficient, possibly 3-day sickness and tick fever, depending on what region you're in. So from that, we also need to have a look at parasite management. So once again, depends where you are, what issues you might have in your area. Things like ticks, flies, they all have an impact on production. So you need to be able to manage those. Going into a breeding season, we need to look at a bull's body condition score. So this is normally done on a scale of 1 to 5, and with 1 being really skinny, 5 being really fat. So ideally, bulls should be in about a 3.5 to 4 going into the season, and that gives them the best chance to work for the time that they're required and to be in good health to be as fertile as they can be for that season. And that all comes back to their nutrition. So making sure a bull is prepared in the 2 to 3 months leading up to joining and not just during joining is really important, because the semen that bull produces actually takes about 9 weeks to develop. So what you see in a sample today could be a reflection of what happened to him 9 weeks ago. So if he was sick or if he was injured back then, his semen sample may not be good at the moment. However, give him a couple of weeks and he should be fine. So this is why it's really important to consider checking your bulls beforehand, and I'll mention more about that in a minute. Another thing to consider is their age. So when working with bulls, ideally they should be in optimal breeding age between about 2 and 6 years old. If they're any younger than that, sometimes their semen quality can be reduced just because they haven't developed enough yet. And once they get older than that 6 or 7 years old, their semen quality will start to drop off because of just age-related issues. Sometimes their ability to work, they have joint issues, they may have been injured at some point in time, or they may have gotten sick. So over time, those bulls don't perform as well as they used to. So when we look at testing those bulls before joining, what's required for sale, firstly, is a bull check, which is done by vets. In this, they measure semen motility, which is how fast and in a straight line that sperm is moving. The morphology, which is the structure of the sperm itself, to make sure it can swim in the first place. The structure of the bull and their conformation, their feet, they check their eyes, their general behaviour and their overall health. So that just makes sure that that bull is in working order for joining or for sale. And just mentioning again, just because he might not pass one semen test doesn't necessarily mean he's not a good bull. It's just that it's showing a set point in time where he may have had a problem. So it's recommended that they get another one or another 2 just to see how they're travelling. If they do have a couple of tests in a row where they've got issues, then maybe it's something to look at, that this bull might not be an ideal candidate to keep in the herd. So when we look at cows, it's very similar. Excuse me. So we look at the vaccinations that are relevant for their area, parasite control, body conditions score, particularly when they're calving, cows need to be at about a 3 out of 5, because when they have that calf, the calf will take a lot of energy out of them, so they will drop a bit of weight after calving. But they need to be at that point so it doesn't take them that long to put the weight back on, and they can start coming back on heat again to getting calf the next time. Then when we look at joining, the body condition score they need to be in is back around that 3, 3.5 and going forward. And that just means as long as they're putting on weight, then they will keep cycling well, and there's a higher chance that they'll get pregnant. So that all goes back to nutrition, like the bulls. And another thing to consider with your cows is the time since calving before they can get pregnant again. So cows won't come back onto heat until about 30 or 40 days after they calve, and that's at absolute minimum. If they're in really good condition after calving, the majority of the herd should be back in about 60 days. However, if they're in poor condition, that will push out further. So that's what happens when their condition isn't managed well. You can have that time slip of those cows falling out of that yearly joining pattern. So ideally, you should be looking at this sort of body condition, or maybe even fractionally better, going into joining and around calving. But if you've got a cow that looks like this, that's just had a calf, then this girl here is going to struggle for a long time, because she's trying to put energy into feeding that calf as well as putting her own weight back on. So that cow there is a very good candidate for something like 120 to 200 days post calving to get back into calf, just because of the weight that she's lost. So it's really important to consider those things. With the heifers, once again, it's all pretty similar. Vaccinations, parasite management. The only thing that's different with heifers is the time at joining. So making sure that they are actually old enough to be on heat to see if she's cycling yet. In heifers, this is related to weight and not age. There's a little bit of a genetic component in there too. So some of them have genetics that predispose them to starting earlier, but overall, it's generally, if you work off weight, it's a good indicator as if they'll be on heat or not. So with Droughtmasters, ideally, you'd be looking at the majority of the herd being at around that 320 to 350 kilos before most of them will be cycling. You will get a few that'll come on earlier than that, but if you want the majority of the herd cycling, that's where you'd be aiming for. About that 320 to 350 kilos is better. So when we're looking at managing the nutrition and managing our breeders coming into joining, it's similar to the bulls. So the quality of the egg that cow ovulates is directly impacted by her health and nutrition in the 2 to 3 months beforehand, because just like the sperm, it takes an egg about 8 to 9 weeks to actually go through the maturation process before that ovulation. So anything that impacts their health, changes in nutrition or illness in that time can affect how fertile they are. So it's important to remember that management prior to is key to a good fertile cow. And the quality of the embryo reflects that as well. And then after joining too, the success of an embryo can also be impacted by the cow's health. So if that cow gets sick a month or so after she falls pregnant, then she can actually lose that calf. So it's 2 or 3 months either side of joining for cows. It's quite important. So when we look at the different types of reproductive management that we have, there's a lot of different systems around. So you need to work out what's going to suit your herd. And to do that, you need to look at what your breeding objectives are. Are you doing it to improve your genetics? Are you wanting to specifically breed for male or female calves? Do you just want to produce more kilos of beef from the land that you currently have? Do you want more calves on the ground? Or do you want to change the overall calving pattern that you have? So, for example, if you join cows all year round, maybe you want to move that back to 6 months or 3 month window. So you can plan what system fits you around what your breeding objectives are. So the different types of reproductive management systems that are available. Firstly, we have continuous mating. So that just means when the bulls and cows are in the paddock all year round, there's not much intervention going on. That's continuous mating. Then we look at controlled mating. So controlled mating is when you move that joining time frame into a set window. So a lot of farms usually work anywhere between a 6-week window or a 3-month window. That's pretty standard for a controlled mating herd. After that, we have heat detection, artificial insemination. So that means when you go out into the paddock and you watch your cows to see which ones come on heat, and you bring them into the yards and inseminate them with the genetics from the bull that you've chosen. After that, we have fixed time AI. So that means that you don't actually have to watch the cows coming on heat. You use a combination of different veterinary drugs to get them all to come on heat at the same time. So you can inseminate all of them in a nice tight little window. So you don't have that extra work involved with watching them come on heat. Then we look at mullet, or you may have heard as flushing. So this is when it's normally done in stud cows. They artificially inseminate the stud cow, and then they flush the embryos out of her and put them into recipient animals. And then the last option is IVF, so in vitro fertilization. So this is similar to flushing, however, they actually collect the eggs from the cow and not the embryos. Then they take them back to the lab where they're fertilized by the scientists at the lab. They're grown there for 7 days before being transferred into recipient animals. So all of the different systems have advantages and disadvantages, but it depends what your business goals are as to which one suits you best. So how do we choose that? So if you're looking for just getting genetic gain from your breeding season, the types of programs that suit that are IVF, flushing, fixed time AI, and controlled mating. They all offer different ways to improve your genetics. But when you're doing this, just remember that the decisions you make today can impact you for years to come. Like I was saying earlier, if you buy a bull, his genetics can hang around for a long time. So make sure you plan this well. If you're looking for just female or male calves, or this is what happens a lot in dairies, they use sex semen for female or for heifer calves. So this isn't as common in beef herds, but the popularity is growing. So the options that we have for this in beef are growing, and it may be something in the future that is more economical and more popular in beef. So for that, you can use IVF, flushing, fixed time AI. They're all ways you can utilize sex semen. When you're looking at breeding more kilos of beef, a few of the different systems can help with that. But one of the main systems where you can really get benefits from it is the fixed time AI. And the reason for that is that at the very beginning of the season, all of the animals in the program are bred at the start of the season. You can also use straws of higher genetic value. So you can buy straws from overseas. You can bring straws up from down south or out west or wherever to invest in better genetics. And often this is cheaper than buying the bull. And when you're working with these programs, if you have some animals in a herd that are problem animals, if they're a bit skinny, if they've got calves with them, then the veterinary programs that you use can actually help kickstart some of these to cycle more so than what they would naturally. So that can be a benefit. Overall, the calving pattern is a lot tighter in these herds, so you get that uniform weaning weight, so they're all a nice, heavy, average weight. And this helps reduce that calving drift. So if you're getting more of those animals pregnant at the beginning of the season and front loading the season, you keep more of your profitable cows in the herd for longer. If you're wanting more calves on the ground, then there's a few different ways you can do that. So maybe you've had a couple of good seasons and you've got lots of grass, which probably not many of us have at the moment, but some do. If you want more calves, then there's a few ways to do that. You can go through IVF, flushing, fixed time AI. These have probably the best ways to multiply your genetics really fast. And the most common way of doing this is fixed time AI, followed up by a second round of fixed time AI. But depending on, this is a more expensive way of doing it. However, it does give you that option of growing your herd very quickly. So Depends how much money you've got available, how much grass you've got available as to which way you go. And then if you want to switch over to seasonal calving, say from year-round joining, some of the options include IVF, fixed time AI, heat detection AI, and just controlled mating in general. And the benefits they provide are shorter calving windows with a longer recovery for the cow. You can also identify any cows sooner in the season if they have problems. So they sometimes in year-round mating systems, they can go undetected for a while. So by doing a seasonal mating, you've actually got more control over those animals that have got problems and can pick them up sooner. You've got more controlled use of resources as well. So you can lock up certain parts of the property and spell the pasture. You can utilise water sources in a more sustainable way. You can plan ahead if you need to get in contract musterers or different staff that you know when you'll need them down the track, because you know when the calves are going to be a certain age or when your cows are going to be a certain age. So it's handy for that. You can have less animals, but more productive animals because they're managed in a better way. And you can use it, some people use it as an emissions management tool for the ones that are doing carbon credits as well. So it's always important to remember that the most profitable pregnancy is the earliest pregnancy in the season, because they are heavier calves that are born in a better season. So when we're looking at decision making for the breeding season, there's a lot of different questions to consider. So the first one is normally, when should I be joining? To assess this, you need to look at what your market options are. Where are you going to sell your cattle to? Is it an export market? Is it a local market? And from there, you know what time of the year you're going to need to have cattle supplied to them. So you can work backwards from that point to see when your cows need to calve for that market. But when you're doing that, also work out if that time frame actually suits your farm. Does that suit your production? And if it doesn't, you might need to have a backup market in place at a different time of year. Or you can see if you can supplement feed to match the market. It just depends on what suits you best. It's a good time to think about too, are your bulls being tested? Are your cows in adequate body condition? All of those things can lead you to the decision of the time that you need to start joining. So when we're preparing animals for breeding, when do you need to start preparing them? Firstly, about 6 months out from joining, just get to know what your breeding objectives are, what you want to achieve, where you want to head with your genetics, what your pastures are doing, and what your property is actually able to carry into the future as well. About 3 to 6 months out, start to ensure your females that are calving in that 3 out of 5 body condition. And that way they've got better chance at getting back in calf. Have any of your supplementation strategies sorted. Make sure that you know what supplements you need to feed, because supplements can be expensive. So without knowing that you're feeding the right thing, you can go months spending a lot of money on something you may not need. So if need be, you can get the vet to test your animals. You can get agronomists, nutritionists to test feed or soil, or there's lots of different options, and it's not overly expensive to get those things tested. Try and develop a good relationship with your vet, because they can help you with a really good herd health strategy. So with your vaccinations, your biosecurity plans, parasite control, all of that leads into better prepared breeders for a season. Then when we get to 1 to 2 months out from joining, you can start finalising all your vaccinations and boosters, and changing any feeds that you may want to, or bring in any supplements, because we need those animals going forward at joining. So all of those things need to be done prior to. And if we think back to earlier in the presentation where we said both bulls and cows need to be prepared a couple of months beforehand to make sure that the sperm and eggs are in good quality. So any changes or vaccinations need to be done before joining to make sure that those animals are healthy and ready to go for breeding. So also at that time, if you are deciding to do AI programs or embryo transfer programs, get all the semen and straws organised. The genetics that you want may not be easily accessible, they might be overseas, so get that organised with time up your sleeve. And currently at the moment with COVID and transport, that can also take some extra time, so it's good to plan that a long way in advance. Book your vet in if you're getting a vet out to do preg testing or the AI itself, because they can fill out fast, particularly when everyone is wanting to join around the same time. Make sure all the animals are pre-tested going into a program as well, because you don't want any surprises, or you can draft off cows that are out of season. Then when we get down to the pointy end of things, 1 to 2 weeks out, we can start organising any final bull tests that you might want to do. Make sure you've got the semen on farm or ready to go on farm at the set time. And all of your veterinary drugs organised if you're going to be doing AI programs. So that all means that you should have smooth running programs leading into it. And just a final thing to remember too is that when you are going through your breeding season, always keep monitoring your bulls and breeders during that time, just in case you spot any injuries, or some of them might get sick, some might get 3-day. So if that happens to some of the bulls, you may need to actually take those bulls out and switch them over for another one that could be working. That way you're not compromising your results overall. So monitoring them is a good idea. So we've covered a fair few different things there in tonight's presentation, but the overall summary from that is that reproduction drives everything in a beef business. So no matter what part of it you're looking at, reproduction has had some impact on that. Every farm is going to have different goals, but healthy bulls and breeders are your main priority to make sure that you do reach those goals. And there's lots of different breeding systems that are available, and it just depends on what you want to achieve as to which one might suit you. So if you're unsure of this, then you can definitely have a chat with your different market or your agents. You can have a chat with your vet. With us at Cattle Plan, we're more than happy to have a chat to you about what systems might suit your business. There's lots of different options, so always have a talk to somebody. When you're planning ahead for your season, it's very important to do that a little way in advance, so you get the best results, your season runs smoothly, your AI programs run smoothly, and you get what you're planning on. But it is just always remember that you can always have a chat to your cattle vet or your Department of Ag, anyone like that, if you've got questions on herd health or breeding in your area. So that is it. It was a bit of a very general overview of all the different aspects of reproduction. But yeah, if you've got any other questions or to clarify anything, I'm happy to take some of those if you like. And that's my details if you wanted to ask any further questions down the track. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm not sure, Michaela, if we've got any other questions there.
Yeah, so we've just had a question come through. And it's just asking, do you have a checklist for bulls and cows for soundness?
So we don't have a set one ourselves that we distribute. However, when you speak to your vet, cattle vets actually have a system in place called Bull Check. I think it's recently been changed to Bull Check, and they do have checklists in place. So certain things they look for in a bull and a cow to make sure that they are sound for breeding. When your vet comes out to preg test your cows, they can look at different internal structures and things like that as well when they're scanning to make sure that those cows are ready to go for joining. So it is a job that some farms get vets out for, is just to check their heifers' structure. They don't necessarily preg test them, but they can be checking for soundness. So yeah, so we don't have set checklists, but that's what the vets have there in place.
Great. So the next question we've got that's come through, what are the Droughtmaster's typical success rates for the different breeding programs?
Yep. Okay. So there's a lot of things that go into saying what typical success rates are, the management leading up to it has a massive impact on your results that you get. So if those cows are in good condition, if they're vaccinated for all of the reproductive diseases that are relevant to you, if the semen you're using is checked, if all of those things are managed well, then you set yourself up for the best results you can get. Also, when you're choosing programs, there's lots of different programs around, and they've been developed with different breeds in mind, sometimes with different ages of animals. So heifers and cows respond a little bit differently. So making sure that the right program is chosen for your cows is another factor that has an impact on results. When you're looking at typical success rates, it varies by breed. So your more tropical breeds, an average success rate to 1, say if you're doing AI, is for heifers. Heifers are always lower than cows. Anywhere between 40 and 55% is fairly normal for heifers. It can be higher than that, it can be lower than that, and it all comes back to your management. In cows, it's usually about 10% higher than that on average. But once again, if you manage them really well, it can be really good. But if they're not managed very well, then it can be quite poor. So that's why we spend a lot more time working with farms and vets on making sure that the actual backgrounding for those animals is good, and to get those outcomes down the track. So I think that answers your question. It's not a black and white answer. There's a lot in it, and that gives you a ballpark figure. So your Bos Taurus animals like Angus, Herefords generally get a bit higher pregnancy rate than any of your tropical breeds. So if you have, say, Brahmins or even Droughtmasters are usually fairly good, but they do sit a little bit lower in success-wise than your Bos Taurus animals.
Great. So we've just had another question come back through with regards to bull and cow soundness.
Yep.
So should we be looking at pelvic area with cows as well as other factors, including low set pin bones, etc., and measuring with a pelvic meter?
Yep. So that does have a little bit of an impact on reproduction. It's more to do with obviously dystocia rates when they're calving, more so than actually getting in calf. It is something that there was a lot of focus on in the past, but it's not as big a focus now, because when you're joining, particularly heifers, focusing on that weight at puberty is more important than their age. So if you're getting animals that are big enough to be cycling to join, then there shouldn't be too many issues with that pelvic area. There will be the occasional genetic, like some cows may throw smaller or calves with smaller pelvises, but it's not a massive issue. But it is something when you have your vet out there scanning. You can get them to scan heifers before joining, and they can look at that for you, and they do use the pelvic measurements as an indicator, but it's not a definitive indicator.
Okay, great. So it doesn't look like we've got any more questions coming through. But if you have any, please send them through. Yeah, so Megan's contact details were on the last slide. So if you have any questions, be sure to get in contact with Megan. I just want to say a big thank you to Megan for jumping on board and doing a webinar with us. It's been very informative, and it's been great to get a few more reproduction tips heading into the next breeding season. So thank you very much, Megan.
That's all right. Thank you for the invitation, and it's been great joining you tonight.
Great. Thank you. We will have a recording out in the next couple of days for everyone to have a rewatch and share with all their friends. So thank you very much, and good night, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.